Consumer protection in the U.S. was and is the story of specific formal legal responses to crises and emergencies that generate great public outrage and require public response, which strayed away from the 19th century common law which emphasized freedom of contract and let the buyer beware. The earliest example was the deplorable conditions that would harm the consumer and the American meatpacking industry. This image from the Library of Congress was taken in Washington, D.C., and is a picture of the original title page from Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, published in 1906. The Jungle, which had been first published as a series of articles in a socialist weekly, exposed Chicago meatpacking industry's nauseating conditions. In a first-hand account by Neil Reynolds in the spring of 1906, he explained how truly nauseating the industry was when he visited various Chicago meatpacking warehouses. The industry had little regard for health or safety in preparing its products for consumer markets. Reynolds described the floors being very dirty, damp, and soggy. Meat scraps were being shoveled from the floors into receptacles where they were left to lie until again shoveled into barrels or into machines for chopping. Most employees were in complete ignorance of cleanliness or danger to health. Meat was also pushed room to room on rotten box carts. Quote, as an extreme example of the entire disregard on the part of employees of any notion of cleanliness is handling dressed meat. We saw a hog that had just been killed, cleaned, washed, and started on its way to the cooling room fall from the sliding rail to a dirty wooden floor and slide part way into a filthy men's privy. It was picked up by two employees, placed upon a truck, carried into the cooling room, and hung up with the other carcasses, no effort being made to clean it. This image from the Library of Congress was taken at Swift's Packing House in Chicago. The picture shows how nasty the environments that meat was packed in, exemplified by the grime on the walls, mustiness in the air, the lack of hair nets, and some guys aren't even wearing gloves. This image from the Library of Congress was also taken at Swift's Packing House. The picture further exemplifies the nauseating environments of meat packing by the mold on the barrels and the ceiling, as well as the wet floor and rotting barrels filled with ham. Theodore Roosevelt read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle and reportedly threw his breakfast sausage out the window. Theodore invited Sinclair to the White House and began an investigation that ended in the passage of the Meat Inspection Act, which also led to the creation of the FDA. Later, the Food and Drugs Act was signed in 1906, known as the Wiley Act. This act prohibited the interstate transport of unlawful food and drugs under penalty of seizure of the questionable products and or prosecution of the responsible parties. Quote, preventing the manufacture, sale, or transportation of unaltered or misbranded or poisonous or deleterious foods, drugs, medicines, and liquors. Drugs, defined in accordance with the standards of strength, quality, and purity in the United States, cannot be sold in any other condition unless the specific variations from the applicable standards were plainly stated on the label. The law prohibited the addition of any ingredients that would substitute for food, conceal damage, pose a health hazard, or constitute a filthy, decomposed substance. For something to be progressive, it has to be moving forward in a positive direction. I believe that consumer protection was progressive because the goal was to stray away from the common law of the 19th century and letting the buyer beware. And acts were created such as the Meat Inspection Act and the Food and Drugs Act that would not only protect the consumer but give them power. Ultimately, consumer protection eliminated one of the many problems in the U.S. during this time period and helped in making America a safer and more appealing place to live.